In this session, we learned from failures that taught us about cultural responsiveness, the nuances of strength-based approaches, and slowing down. Welcome to the After Podcast. I am Naveed Zamani and I am your host. I am pleased to welcome you to the second season of this podcast. This season, I'll be asking guests to share a story about a client case where they were uncertain or thought they failed. And I'd be interested to hear what they learned. Of course, all guests are asked to and know to obscure details to maintain the confidentiality of their clients. And I thank all our guests this season for their bravery in sharing about points of failure and exposing us to a window of experience that we all have participated in. In this session, I'll be speaking with Dr. Tabitha Webster. Dr. Webster is an associate professor and co-branch director at Alliant International University in the CFT program. She serves on the Faculty Senate and as the chair of the CFT Curriculum Committee. She serves on the AFTA board and is co-chair of the 2025 Conference Committee. With a background in neuroscience, her research interests center on trauma, including neurobiology, neurofeedback, neurodiversity, developmental and childhood trauma, marginalized and oppressed communities, suicide prevention, and professional policy. Her clinical approach is affirming and grounded in experientialism, drawing from community mental health and private practice experiences. She's also lived in 10 states, in towns as small as 250 people and as big as 2.3 million. Dr. Webster, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to be with you. I also want to be mindful that we are at the cusp of the 2025 conference at the time of this recording. So before we get into the question, I was wondering if you'd share a little bit about what you have in the works and what you're kind of excited for this conference this year.
Thank you. Yes. And thank you for having me. I was really excited to be able to come just even for a short minute, talk about the conference. Our small conference team has put a lot of energy and effort into the virtual conference this year. And it's really focused on really looking at the sort of systemic frame of research and technology and education in the age of research and technology and AI and advanced technology and how this is shaping our field and the ways we're maybe fighting against it and the ways we're incorporating it and integrating it into all that we do. And so we have just a really incredible lineup. It's maybe a simpler conference than folks are used to in our live conferences, in-person conferences, but we're so excited for the folks that have come forward and to share their expertise and their thoughts. And, for me, AFTA is always about the conversation. And I think that's really what we're still hoping to have is how do we, spark and challenge some of the things that are going on for better and worse for our field. Our keynote this year, Kat Herline, who's been working in the technology space for decades, literally wrote the telehealth guidelines for AAMFT in 2015, I think is when those ones came out. She's been in the space a really long time, thinking about it for a really long time. And so we're really excited to have her join us in that keynote capacity. Our other, we will have our interest groups as always, which are always such a thought-provoking space. And then our other sort of big, unique event is we have a global panel of presidents, vice presidents from family therapy associations across the globe that are going to come and talk about AI and technology in their spaces and the countries that they represent, and have a really, hopefully global context conversation of the challenges and the positives that are coming out of AI and advanced technology from a global perspective. And that's going to be really cool as well.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm looking forward to that. And it's honestly incredible to think that 10 years ago, we the first telehealth guidelines were written, and now we're contending with artificial intelligence and its influence in our work. So the pace of technology is wild.
Yes.
And I imagine, in some ways, the conference is archival in the ways that it kind of captures a moment in our relationship to AI. And perhaps
Yeah.
even this podcast, when people listen in a year, 2 years, 5 years, they might chuckle at how we're engaging with AI or thinking about it, or,
Yes.
depending on how pessimistic or optimistic you are about it.
That's right. And I think we have a nice balance of that in our presentations. The pessimism as well as the hope and how it can be supportive and helpful.
Yeah. Well, I know that this is the first, correct me if I'm wrong, fully volunteer run conference.
That is correct.
So
Yep.
thank you so much for your efforts and your time and commitment to helping our community connect and learn from each other.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, we're excited. We've been working hard. And I do really believe this is going to be a great conference.
Yeah, looks like it. Well, thanks for sharing about that, Dr. Webster. So,
Yeah.
in the spirit of kind of, pivoting from AI to the humanness of our work that involves learning from our failures, um, I'm going to ask you the question. You're my first person that gets to
Yeah.
kind of
Very
contend.
exciting.
Yeah. So, if you don't mind sharing about a client case where you were uncertain or you thought you failed, and along the way, I'd like to tap into and kind of capture learnings.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this question. When when you reached out with this question, I'm like, oh, I've got so many,
I think we
and
all do.
right, and it sparked a lot of thoughts. Um, but I also want to name just at the top here, as we were speaking before. I have a piece of me. I'm a neurodivergent human. I'm really open and out about that. Uh, Talked about that at the conference last year. And so I have a lot of nerves being here. There's a lot of parts of me that doesn't feel like I belong in these spaces. And I sort of wanted to name that at the top. And in the space of, thinking about ways that we've learned and maybe failed and learned. Maybe this will be one of them. I'm not sure, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the bravery and sharing about your
Yeah.
experiences and being here.
So the first client, so there's a couple, but this one really when I share this couple with my students often because I think it really resonates with students. And I was a student at the time.
Hmm.
And it was one of my really first cases. In the program I went to, we got assigned cases within months of entering the program. Right. So every program's set up a little bit different in that way, but always remember like it was almost exactly 2 months after I started my master's program, I got assigned my first client. This was shortly thereafter, sometime in that early part of learning. So a lot of learning. Um, but in the student clinic, a couple came in and they were, the cultural context of the school I went to and the clinic I went to, or our student clinic was in Utah, and the LDS sort of cultural context is really really important, and not an uncommon sort of couple case scenario around pornography
And
in
just for
that
folks who
space.
might, I'm sorry to interrupt you. And just for folks who might
Yeah.
not know, LDS stands for Latter-day Saints. Is that right?
Yes.
Great.
Yes. Yeah. The
Which
Church
is
of
a
Latter-day
religious,
Saints.
religious community.
Religious community, commonly known as Mormon, right, or Mormonism, but the church itself has asked that terminology not be used
Okay.
and
Great to
to
know.
be used Latter-day Saints. So, yeah,
Thank you.
just for context. And so, right, and not unsurprising or not like in other cultural contexts and religions and such, pornography can be a issue, concern, that a lot of couples face. And so this this couple came in, and the young, again, cultural context there often, um, and the woman was really concerned about what her husband had been viewing while he was out of town. And I had enough training at least to ask a little bit about like what we're reviewing, what was that context, and it was basically a swimsuit ad that that he had looked at and reported back to his wife about, and in my space, in my cultural context, and in my learning process, I blurt laughed when he said a swimsuit ad, right? Because I'm ready for at least my interpretation of right of like hardcore pornography or something very graphic or right. And it was, I just straight out blurt laughed at this couple's pain
Because you were kind of
to their
surprised.
faces.
You're surprised by in where your definition of pornography met their definition.
Yes, yes. And how distressed,
Uh-huh.
right, that the couple system was with this information, and how misaligned I was in being able to sit where they were in the distress, um thinking about just buying swimsuits and that sort of thing. Like it didn't match my context, it didn't match my culture, it didn't match my framing, and I literally blurt laughed to their faces. And it was so, right, like immediately so clear and so painful for them
Uh,
that that was my response.
and I'll just have to say for folks who are listening, because they can't see you, I can see the tension and strain and discomfort
Yeah,
in your face as
yeah,
you're remembering this event.
yeah. I'm flushed. I can even feel it. Like how embarrassing, right? To just laugh at somebody's pain.
Hmm.
Um, and unsurprisingly, they never came back to see me.
Hmm. How did you, well, is it okay if I ask a couple questions about that
Yeah,
moment?
please. Yeah.
How did you kind of recover or manage that moment after the laugh?
I'm not sure that I did recover.
Hmm.
I think I just tried to ask some questions. I don't think I had good understanding, at least that point, of repair or
Uh-huh.
apology. Right. I probably shut down a little bit in my nervousness and my embarrassment.
Okay.
At that point in my life, I didn't have language for my neurodivergence. And right, I think some of that context would have been helpful in uh, describing my experience there or moving through it. But I didn't have any of that at the time. Um, and just remember the woman just shut down,
Hmm.
and I think rightfully so, right? And I think we probably ended session a little early, and I went immediately to my supervisor and said, like, I messed up. Um, but I reflect on that case a lot. A, because it's so apparently a failure, but it's taught me a lot about cultural humility,
Hmm.
cultural, responsiveness. I often reflect on it in terms of right that right I didn't understand, but sitting with clients in spaces that we don't have lived experience with or for or context, and how do we step out of ourselves to hold that space of something that we don't have that understanding for, that lived experience, like our true personal understanding, right? Uh, I often talk to students about you know cultural competency just being the knowledge base, but that moving through cultural humility, stepping out of that you don't know anything, and then how do you combine both that like knowing and unknowing at the same time to actually hold a responsive space for clients?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's sort of been a guiding light in a lot of ways through a lot of cultural experiences that as a white woman that I don't have the lived experience for. Because I remember, right, the sort of transference of the pain I felt by laughing at somebody else's pain in that moment.
Mm-hmm. I imagine too that there's something, and I don't want to speak for your experience, so please edit me or correct me. Um, I imagine too that the transference you're describing and maybe the embarrassment also speaks to an ethic of care that you're invested in where you probably didn't want to make them feel badly about that or kind of laugh in their face.
Yeah, I mean, again, super, only a couple months into training, so but I didn't get into it for, to laugh at people. That
Right,
wasn't the
right,
intention, right? Um, Although I do really enjoy laughing, so there's some maybe context there, but not people for that,
right,
not for
right.
their pain. Uh, yeah, so that flip side that I'm an experientialist. I talk about, use of self in session a lot. Um, Again, as a neurodivergent human, then sort of flipping that experience and the times that I have felt that my pain's been laughed at because people didn't understand, right, my lived experience and what I was struggling with at the time. So that all kind of, comes full circle in how we show up.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a way that, well, this is maybe a silly comment, but I've heard about couples who find counselors that end up helping them unite against a couple's counselor. So maybe there's a way that
Yeah.
you had some
Yeah.
effects beyond what you.
I hope that was the result that they went home and were like, oh, what a horrible person and
Oh no,
could
I doubt that.
unite on that because I definitely didn't do much other than that
Yeah.
for sure.
How do students react when you share the story with them?
I think it resonates, right? It's funny in that I think, some students have like secondhand embarrassment for me. Like you can see them blush and feel bad for me.
Uh-huh.
But I also think it is validating in the student experience that, I mean, that's a pretty clear mess up, right? Pretty clear failure. A lot of the things that students do or worry about are never going to be to that level. And so I think that's validating in their learning process that even if you do that, you're still probably going to be okay, right? It wasn't great. It wasn't unethical. Well, maybe it was a little unethical. That's maybe a side tangent, but right. I think it validates both their fear of messing up and gives them a little bit of permission to work it out and figure out some of these spaces that maybe they haven't thought about before. Because I think that was a little bit of it for me in that moment, right? Is I hadn't really contextualized my definition of pornography and how it could be different than the cultural context that I was seeing. And so I had a reaction, right, versus a response to what happened in that moment.
Right. Yeah, you're speaking so nicely to such a complicated territory because I want to honor that. I'm grateful you had I mean, I don't know if you'd call it a lesson, but a learning about cultural humility early on. That's
Yeah.
probably, I assume, helpful for everyone that followed that experience.
Yeah.
But it's such a complicated territory because the attending to the practice and kind of leaning into methods of practice in this work are so important. But also our practice is done in like a high stakes environment where it's like clients' lives. I think that about that a lot because for folks who listen or know me know that I play music and yeah, you got to kind of like be familiar with the scales and your instrument. But
Hmm.
if I mess up on a piano or the drums or something, it doesn't like hurt their feelings. and the piano doesn't
Sure.
get harmed
Yeah.
typically. Um, yeah, so it's such a ethically challenging part of our field that we have to practice with people.
Yeah. Yeah. And learn on people.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, if I could ask another question, and I know you had another client case you
Yeah.
wanted to share about. Did you encounter stories of porn that you can remember after that? And like, how did you notice yourself in that moment coming off your last time encountering porn, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. Definitely like a heightened awareness, right? Like those, if I get the intake information or I knew that was part of a case coming in, there was definitely a heightened awareness and a slowing down and sort of fighting the visceral shame and embarrassment of what happened before, right? Like that internal process of like, this is a new case and you're going to be okay. And you learned from that case and you're not going to do that again. But those fears of, right, am I going to offend in the same way and not be able to hold the space for this presenting problem, right? Like, is this just going to be something I can't as a therapist work with? I don't want to say that, right? Like, I don't want to go to that space, but I think there was a lot of that worry and anxiety. Um, Again, especially in that cultural context where there a lot of cases had, some component of that in Utah. And so, it was really important that I figure out how to uh, again find that culturally responsive space where, moving it out of whatever it was for me, right, and dealing with that.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and uh, yeah, I hope that couple found the help they were seeking.
Me too. Yeah, I still think about them, obviously. And I really do hope that they found somebody that could help them.
Yeah.
The other case, you ready for this one? This kind of moves into more a space where I have expertise is with trauma and childhood trauma. I've been in that world for a long time, even before I got into marriage and family therapy as a profession. And being an experientialist, right, really having that belief that clients have what they need inside of them. And right, our role as the therapist is to move away those defense mechanisms and really allow that to shine and be there for them. And this was a older adult woman who had experienced just a lifetime of repeated horrible traumatic experiences. Um, One of those cases that you just never forget because of how much and how often the intensity. And she really amazed me, right, as a human that had been through so much suffering and was doing as well as she was, right? And I think a lot of us do this, and that's partially why this, case always comes to mind as well. And I talk about it when I teach my trauma course. Um, we do this thing with trauma folks uh, from that space of trying to be strength based, where we end up validating the trauma itself and not the person.
Hmm.
And this woman, I really kept telling her, like, I believe in you, and I'm going to believe in you until you believe in you. And sort of really repeated that message a lot. And it was one of the times that she actually went to my supervisor to fire me. And so I got called into my supervisor's office, right? Client complaint, they're terminating with you. And the report was, and this is funny to say because it doesn't feel negative on the surface, but I think that's where the learning came from, right? The complaint was, I believed in her too much.
Oh,
That's what she had reported to my supervisor.
Interesting.
So again, on the surface, that doesn't sound terrible, right? Uh, and it somewhat was confusing at the time, and we processed it or whatever. But the longer that I've been in trauma work, the more that it actually has made sense to me, because we do, again, the strength based, right? You are so strong because of everything that you've been through,
Hmm.
which ultimately just validates that their strength came from the trauma. If the trauma wasn't there, they wouldn't have been strong.
I see what you're saying. I was so caught by that distinction of validating the trauma itself and not the
Yeah.
person. And this explain, yeah, I'm tracking.
Yeah. So, right, that's this, and we do it all the time. I see therapists do this all of the time from this place of strength. And honestly, right, it's not, I think it comes from awe when we sit and we really see the intensity of some of that suffering. And there's awe in the resilience and the true awesomeness of that human. But when we say it, when we frame it back to them, right, we're saying, wow, look how amazing you are because you've had all these bad things happen,
Right.
which isn't actually about them. It's about all of the violations, the violence, the perpetrations, the terribleness. Would they not be awesome to us if that suffering hadn't happened?
Fascinating. Yeah. So it's such an easy path to walk down because it's so um what's the word? It's so inviting to want to like make our clients feel better and kind of affirm them,
Yeah,
but in
yeah,
the process and in the language we use, if I'm hearing you right, we end up kind of honoring their traumatic experiences. So
right.
how would you do that differently now on the heels of that experience? Or like how would you avoid that? I'm trying to even think for myself what I would
Yeah,
say.
I mean, I just don't even go there, honestly, right? Like, I don't, I will name over and over again the violence, the perpetration, the unfairness, the injustice, the pain.
Right.
And hopefully, right through the therapy process, we get to a space where they begin to be empowered and own strength in who they are outside of the trauma, right? Not because of the trauma am I strong, but I am strong. And that has allowed me this space through the things that I've been through. But we can't feed that to them, I don't think. I don't think we can actually, right? Because then it always becomes validating the pain that made the strength until they actually own that that is inherently always them.
Yeah, and I don't want to be too dramatic or far-reaching with some of my statements, but for the sake of the conversation, you're making me think that in some ways those practices of validation and affirmations and like the focus on strengths in the way you're describing them kind of inadvertently centers and privileges the therapist's discomfort with horrific stories
Yes,
rather than perhaps a process that honors the ways that violence can invite people to conclude certain things about themselves,
right,
and then how to not participate in those conclusions.
right,
Hmm.
right, right. In the space of empowering, we need to, I mean, right, not be continuing the perpetration that somehow they were less than until this thing happened.
Right. Which feels like a culturally available narrative in some ways too. Kind of like the
Yeah.
hero's journey narrative, or some of the ways
Yep.
that like, um, yeah, dominant stories and ways that movies and yeah, kind of Western stories kind of center a particular struggle, and then that struggle transforms the character into a better
Right.
version. So I can see how
Right.
available that is.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, I mean, as you were saying that, right? Again, I work in the neurodivergent space now, and that's a really prevalent one for neurodivergent humans as well, right? It's this balance of the actual disability piece, the struggles, living in a world that's not made for you, but we're also told, right? There's that superhero piece of like, but look at all the superpowers that you have because of this, right? And it negates the pain and suffering piece of it and the traumatic experience living in a space where you don't belong, feeling like you can never belong. And the struggles there, right? And they're like, well, look at all these great things you do. We're going to ignore this other part and essentially invalidate the pain of existence like that.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the ways that like perhaps, prior to kind of like Socratic or more Christian versions of stories, like the Greek tragedy, where you kind of
Mm,
honor people as both not good people and, like flawed and okay in various times, and that stories don't end necessarily clean and well. I know
yeah,
for myself as in my experience of Persian films, Iranian films,
yeah,
they just kind of end and they're not really clean, and the characters are not perfectly good or perfectly bad, and
yeah.
it's interesting to
There's no
watch with
nice
Western.
little bow at the end, and you
Yeah,
walk away with warm fuzzies.
yeah, interesting. Yeah, yeah, it's making me really think about how the work you're doing is in perhaps resistance to kind of the cultural forces that shape stories of trauma, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah, and like, yeah, I think, as I said, like, I think a lot of us do it naturally, a lot of us that are in that strength based, and there is some true, awe of how humanness can survive as much as it can.
Right.
Um, I think most trauma therapists, right, whatever kind of level, but I've heard some really incredibly horrific things as a trauma therapist that you can't even imagine, that don't even feel real sometimes, right? That a human could perpetrate that onto another human,
Mm,
and yet this human's sitting in front of you, and there is an awe in the humanness of it all. But when you tell a client that, right, when you reflect that back to them, and that's not their interpretation, and they feel so broken, so, whatever their internal narratives are, it actually, right, pushes you further away from being able to attune and connect with them.
right. Uh, Thanks for sharing that. I want to say a couple things, but interrupt me here, Tabitha, because I don't want to rant for too long here. But I do want to say that I'm appreciating the ways that you're tending to perhaps not the simplicity, but some of the unconsidered and inadvertent effects of a strength-based or centered approach. And I want to be respectful to listeners who are probably aligned with and interested in this practice, that like I hope I'm not encouraging a dualism that like it's good or bad, but
Right.
rather the nuance of the process. Because in my own experiences, I've encountered some ways that the strength-based spirit gets kind of wrenched out of some of how I understood its original hopes and into a bureaucratic process. Let
Mm,
me be more specific. I've been in these, they're called like family meetings with like child welfare services and stuff,
hmm.
where
Yep.
part of their bureaucratic process is to start with a strength-based questions.
Yes.
And it's not really as an ethic as much as like a administrative demand that
Hmm.
kind of sometimes for me makes it feel like makes the social workers feel better about the power that they've induced into these clients'
Mm,
lives.
hmm.
And I'm thinking specifically about this Afghan mom I was working with who had her children removed from her. And it's a very long story, but it's littered with injustice, both in the abuse she encountered, but also the ways that the system perpetrated further harm in their attempts to handle her or handle
Mm,
her case without considerations of linguistic justice or cultural knowledge or humility. But I'll never forget, she had her children removed from her, and her children were placed with an English speaking family, and the social workers wouldn't allow her to speak in Farsi with her children or daddy. They would force
mm-hmm.
her to speak in English because they wanted to know what
Right.
she was saying. So they were kind
Yep.
of ripping her apart from her linguistic cultural context inadvertently. or perhaps depending on their perspective on purpose, but felt inadvertent. Um, but I'll never forget that in this meeting, they asked mom, okay, so tell us what's going well. We have to start with the strength-based thing. So tell us what's going well. What are you noticing? What's improving? And then I hear the interpreter translate that. And in Farsi, that question just is honestly lands pretty offensive when you've removed someone's children from them. It just doesn't
Sure.
culturally fit. And
Yeah.
I just remember being like, nothing's good. My children are gone. I have to wake up in the middle of the night to work at Amazon, and then I have to
Yeah.
go to classes during the day, like right in the morning, and then I'm like trying to squeeze in visits with my kids. Like, this is not good. And so then the interpreter translates it back to English, and they're like, "Well, tell us what you're learning. Tell us what's good." And they translate again. She's like, nothing's good." And this went
Yeah.
on for a while until I had to intervene and
Yeah.
say, like, "Look, your question, one, is not landing, and two, it's causing more harm because it's making you guys look like you don't really care about her
Yeah.
suffering."
Right.
But they just were like, we have to start with this question. And it took a
Yeah.
while to get them to rip off of it. So I don't know why your story kind of made me think of that experience I
Yeah.
had.
No, and as you were saying that, right, I also more work mostly with family and kiddos in community mental health and a lot of court involvement, CPS cases. And as you were saying that, like five came to my head with a very similar, most of those were Spanish speaking, families, but that same sort of
Demand,
process of nothing is good, right? Like you're tearing us apart. Why are you asking me what's good?
right? Hmm. Well, I could sit here and kind of think about this with you for a while. But I'm really grateful for the ways that you've sparked some thoughts from me, and I hope for listeners too. And as folks are listening to like not land too squarely into any firm ideas, because I think there's a way that perhaps we're trying to rescue the interest in the resilience of families without it kind of obscuring perhaps their preferences or maybe what's going on now.
Mm.
I'm trying to I wonder if you could like kind of help me finish out this sentence. Like,
Yeah, I think this isn't your sentence, it's mine, but
yeah,
add
yeah,
to mine.
please.
Right. The idea of, I think for both of them, slowing down and being really intentional about the system of what we're bringing in when we make those comments,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's the cultural humility piece or this validation of pain, right? Those are they feel like natural processes that just evolved in I don't know, therapy, psychotherapy. Um, but I think some of this is questioning why we do what we do in our processes in therapy, right? Like what impact do they actually end up having on our clients if we're just kind of tending on our natural processes instead of really slowing down and being curious and questioning our own internal pieces, like you said, discomfort or um, cultural perspective or whatever that may be, but not getting too comfortable with how we do therapy.
Thank you so much, Dr. Webster. That's such a nice kind of capture of some of the ways I heard what's important to you and what you in your work and what you've like kind of learned from these experiences that I'm so grateful you shared with us because it's not easy to come on a podcast and share about failures. And I'll just say part of my inspiration is to hearing students talk about reading books and always hearing very nice, clean stories where things go well
Mm-hmm.
and then rarely encountering those moments. Um, so I appreciate you kind of supporting an effort to make visible, like we've all learned through some difficult, challenging
Yeah.
moments where it hasn't felt clean
Yeah.
or, yeah, it's failure, maybe a strong word, but at times it's felt like a failure.
Yeah. Or it felt like a failure to at least the clients, right? Like that ultimately is what matters.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dr. Webster, for joining us. Thank you again for your efforts on the conference planning and If folks wanted to kind of connect with you in your work, do you have any recommendations or ways they could, yeah, find your work?
Well, I'm on the APTA listserv, so you
Right.
can find me there. And hopefully we'll see a whole bunch of you at the conference, and contact information will be shared there as well. So, and on the board as well. So there's lots of ways to find me in APTA.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.